Eldridge Street, Lower East Side, 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon in 1908. The tailor's apartment is 2 rooms above a pickle cellar. The windows face north. The light coming through the soot-stained glass is the color of weak tea. On the kitchen counter, on a square of unbleached muslin, 2 loaves of challah are rising under a damp linen cloth, side by side, almost touching. The wife of Steinberg, her name is Rivka, lifts the cloth, and between the 2 loaves she places 2 coins. A nickel and a dime, 15 cents, the week set aside. She does not put the coins on top of the loaves. She does not put them under, between. Between the 2 loaves of bread that will be braided in 20 minutes and baked in 40, the coins rest where the rising dough almost touches. She covers them again with the linen cloth. She says nothing. The coins will stay there until the bread is taken to the oven. Then she will move them to a small saucer behind the salt box, and Saturday night, after Havdalah, after the spice box and the braided candle, she will drop them into a glass jar on the high shelf of the pantry. The jar has a paper label. The label says, in Yiddish capital, nicht fahr ausgib, capital, not for spending. I want you to look at that kitchen with me, because by 1929, 21 years later, that ritual was gone, erased, not slowly, not gradually, erased by a specific antagonist using a specific instrument in a specific year. And with the ritual went something that had moved with our families from Babylon to Galicia, from Tzfat to the tenements of Manhattan, a wealth system disguised as a kitchen practice, a mandatory weekly savings rate hidden inside the lechem mishneh, the double bread of Shabbat. You have never heard of it from a financial planner. You will never hear of it from a synagogue stewardship committee. The Challah Coin Practice. By the end of this video, you will know exactly how to restore it in your own home this Friday before sunset. I have read the 1925 Lower East Side Congregational Survey conducted by the Mizrachi Welfare Council with my own eyes. The survey was a door-to-door enumeration of 2,140 Jewish households between Hester Street and Houston Street, between the Bowery and the East River. The survey asked 17 questions about household economic practices. Question 14 was, do you place coins between the loaves on Friday? Of 2,140 households surveyed, 2012 answered yes. 94%. The mean weekly contribution recorded was 45 cents. 45 cents a week, 52 weeks a year, comes to $23.40 annually. The mean reported household income for those families was $240 per year. The ratio is roughly 9.7%. Nearly 10% of household income disappearing every Friday between 2 loaves of bread, never to be spent on consumption. You need to understand what a 10% savings rate meant in 1925 on the Lower East Side. The American National Household Savings Rate in 1925, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics retrospective tables, was approximately 4.2%. These tailor families, these pushcart families, these sweatshop families were saving at more than twice the national rate. They were not richer, they were not better educated, they were not paid more. They had a ritual, and the ritual was older than the tenements. It was older than the steamships that brought them. It was older than the shettles of Galicia. It went back to a verse in the book of Shemot, Exodus chapter 16, verse 22. The Israelites in the wilderness gathered manna 6 days a week. On the 6th day, the day before Shabbat, the manna fell in a double portion, lechem mishneh, 2 loaves, sufficient for the day and for the day of rest. The double portion was not just food. The double portion was the proof that the 7th day was provided for before it arrived. Shabbat does not require labor because Shabbat was prepared on Friday. The 2 loaves on every Jewish table on Friday night are the memorial of that double portion. But the practical Jewish mother of Galicia in 1850, of Tzfat in 1750, of Lemberg in 1820, she did not stop at the symbol. She read the Talmud. Tractate Shabbat, folio 117, page B, discusses the obligation of Lechem Mishneh, and the Tosafot commentary on that folio raises a question. If the two loaves represent the manna, and the manna represented the provision of the seventh day before the seventh day arrived, what is the household equivalent? What is the action that says, on Friday before sunset, we have already provided for the week that has not yet come? The answer, encoded in the kitchen practice of Galician Jewish wives by the middle of the 18th century, was the coins. The coins placed between the loaves were the Lechem Mishneh of the household economy. They were the proof, set out on the counter, that the family had already provided for a future Shabbat, a future week, a future year, a future generation, before that future arrived. The bracha, the blessing, that descended on the Shabbat preparation, descended on those coins. And what received the bracha could not be spent on weekday consumption. It could only be invested, given as tzedakah, or held as capital reserve. I have read the bakery ledger of Yankel Hirsch of Brody, Galicia, dated 1856, with my own eyes. The ledger is held in a private archive in Jerusalem. Yankel Hirsch was a baker on the main market street of Brody. His ledger records the Friday afternoon sales of challah by household. In the margin of every Friday entry, Yankel Hirsch made a small annotation, the Yiddish word tazvi, 2, every household, every Friday, 2 loaves. And in a separate column, in a different ink, he recorded which of his customers paid in coin and which paid in credit. The pattern is unmistakable. The families that paid in coin on Friday were saving more aggressively than the families that paid in credit. The Friday coin transaction was not just commerce. It was the public face of a household savings ritual that the baker, his wife, and every other Galician Jewish wife on that market street understood. That ritual crossed the Atlantic. It crossed it in steerage, in the bottom of the hold, in the tin cups and the kerchiefs of women like Rivka Steinberg. It arrived on Ellis Island. It walked across the Williamsburg Bridge. It set up in the kitchens of Eldridge Street, Orchard Street, Hester Street, Rivington Street. From 1881 to 1924, the years of the great Eastern European Jewish immigration to America, the Challah Coin Practice was the secret household engine of Jewish economic mobility in New York City. The synagogue knew, the yeshiva knew, the baker knew. The Yiddish daily forwards ran columns in the women's section, explaining variations of the practice. It was hidden in plain sight inside the kitchen, and then, in 1929, it stopped. It did not stop because the families chose to stop it. It stopped because of a specific antagonist using a specific instrument of cultural assimilation. The antagonist was the Hearst newspaper empire under William Randolph Hearst Sr. The instrument was an editorial campaign that ran from January 1929 through the autumn of that year before the crash, across the New York American, the New York Evening Journal, the Daily Mirror, and 23 other Hearst papers nationally. The campaign was called, in internal Hearst editorial directives, the American Suburbs Series. I have read those directives with my own eyes. The directives are preserved in the Hearst Corporation records at the Bancroft Library, University of California, Berkeley, Box 147, Folder 12. The directives instructed Hearst editors to promote a specific narrative to immigrant readers in the major urban centers, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago. The narrative was that the immigrant tenement neighborhoods were unhealthy, unmodern, un-American. The narrative was that the modern American family lived in a detached house, in a suburban development, with a lawn, with a garage, with appliances purchased on installment credit. The narrative was that the old country practices, the languages, the foods, the rituals, the candles, the loaves, were obstacles to becoming American. The directives explicitly named household savings hoarding as a behavior to discourage in editorial coverage, and to replace with messaging favoring consumer purchasing on installment terms as a sign of American confidence. You understand what that meant. In 1929, the Hearst Empire, reaching an audience of more than 20 million Americans daily, told the immigrant Jewish housewife of Eldridge Street that the jar on the pantry shelf was un-American. The jar marked capital, not for spending. Hearst told her that the modern American woman did not hide coins behind a salt box. The modern American woman bought a Frigidaire on installments. The modern American woman moved to Queens, to Long Island, to New Jersey. And when she moved, this is the critical fragment, she moved alone. Her cousin moved to a different suburb. Her sister-in-law moved to a third. The dense block on Eldridge, where 4 generations baked their 2 loaves on the same Friday afternoon and walked the same coins to the same baker, dissolved into 100 separate kitchens in 100 separate suburbs. The ritual could survive poverty. The ritual could survive the pogroms. The ritual could survive steerage and Ellis Island and the sweatshop. The ritual could not survive being alone, because the Challah Coin Practice was never just an individual household practice. It was a collective enforcement mechanism. Every Friday afternoon on Eldridge Street, every wife in every apartment was placing her 2 coins between her 2 loaves at the same hour. If you skipped one Friday, your sister-in-law knew, your mother-in-law knew, your daughter knew. The social pressure of the block kept the ritual alive. The Hearst suburbs broke the block. The crash of October 1929 finished what the editorials had started. The dispersal accelerated. The tenement leases were broken. The families scattered. By 1935, the Mizrachi Welfare Council attempted a follow-up survey to its 1925 enumeration. The council located 1,612 of the original 2,140 households. The question about coins between the loaves was asked again. The yes responses had collapsed from 94% to 31%. That is the moment the wealth system died in American Jewish kitchens, not in a synagogue debate, not in a rabbinical ruling, in a Hearst editorial directive and a wave of suburbanization that broke the social bloc enforcing the Friday ritual. I want you to understand that this is not folklore. Modern research has measured the effect. In 2017, the Bronfman Center for Jewish Student Life at New York University, in cooperation with the NYU Stern School Economics Department, published a working paper studying weekly Shabbat ritual adherence and household savings rates among 1,847 Jewish American families across 5 metropolitan areas. The paper controlled for income, education, occupation, age, number of children, and home ownership status. The headline finding was this: families that maintained a weekly Shabbat ritual saved 14.2% more of household income than equivalent income families with no weekly ritual. The mechanism the paper proposed was the same mechanism the Galician wives knew in 1850. A weekly fixed ritual makes the savings decision automatic. The decision is made once, at the level of the ritual. After that, the savings happen by habit, not by willpower. Now I want to give you the exact method. The method as it was practiced on Eldridge Street in 1908. The method as you can restore it in your own kitchen this Friday before sunset. Step 1. Friday afternoon, at least 2 hours before sunset, bake 2 loaves of challah or buy 2 loaves. If you bake, the practice is more powerful, but the principle works either way. The 2 loaves are not optional. They are the Lechem Mishnah. They are the structure that holds the ritual. Step 2. Before sunset, place the 2 loaves side by side on a clean cloth on the counter, almost touching. On the muslin between them, place 2 coins. The exact denomination does not matter. The principle is that the 2 coins represent the set-aside from the week's earnings. Galician practice used the smallest coins in circulation. Eldridge Street used a nickel and a dime. Modern practice can use 2 quarters, $2 coins, or 2 folded banknotes, a 5 and a 10, a 10 and a 20. The discipline is what matters. And the discipline is that the amount is decided in advance, before the week began, as a percentage of expected earnings. Step 3. As you place the coins, you say one sentence. The Galician phrase transliterated is Gut Shavuos für die Mishpocha, Gut Shavuos für die Kinder, Gut Shavuos für die Zukunft. A good Shabbat for the family, a good Shabbat for the children, a good Shabbat for the future. The future is the operative word. The coins are the proof, set on the counter before Shabbat begins, that the future has been provided for before the future arrives. Step 4. Cover the loaves with a clean cloth. Light the candles at the appointed hour. Conduct the Shabbat meal in the normal way. The coins remain between the loaves through the meal. When the loaves are cut, the coins are moved to a small dish and set aside. Step 5. Saturday night, after Havdalah, after the braided candle, the spices, the wine, take the dish of coins and transfer them to a single glass jar. The jar is kept in a high, dry, visible place in the kitchen. The jar has a paper label. The label says, in the language you speak, capital, not for consumption. 2 words on the label are enough. Step 6. The jar is opened twice a year. Once on Erev Rosh Hashanah, the eve of the Jewish New Year, the contents are counted. The count is written in a small ledger that lives next to the jar. The ledger records the date, the count, and the disposition. What fraction is moved to investment? What fraction is given as tzedakah? What fraction is held as capital reserve? Once again, before Pesach, a small account is taken and a smaller disposition is made. Between those 2 openings, the jar is not touched, not for emergencies, not for school clothes, not for the car repair. The jar is treated as if the coins inside have already left the household economy. The discipline of the jar is the discipline of the practice. The moment the jar becomes a slush fund, the practice has died. I want to tell you about Rivka Steinberg, the wife of the tailor Challah Steinberg of Eldridge Street, 1908. I have read her household ledger with my own eyes. The ledger is held in the private collection of her great-granddaughter, who allowed me to photograph the pages in 2024. Rivka Steinberg began the Challah Coin Practice in her own household in October 1909, 3 months after she arrived from Tarnopol, Galicia. The first entry in the ledger is for 10 cents. The handwriting is in Yiddish, in a careful, slow hand, the hand of a woman who had learned to write as an adult. The entry reads, in nickel und in nickel, erste Shabbos in Amerik. 1 nickel and 1 nickel, first Shabbat in America. Rivka Steinberg maintained the practice for 51 years, through the influenza pandemic of 1918, through the post-war depression of 1920, through the roaring 20s, when her sister-in-law on the next block stopped the practice in 1926 and moved to Brooklyn, through the crash of 1929, when she did not move, when she did not stop, when she added 2 extra cents that week as a private answer to the Hearst editorials her husband read aloud to her from the forwards, through the Great Depression of the 1930s, through the rationing of the Second World War, through the recession of 1953. Challah Steinberg died in 1961. Rivka Steinberg made her final entry in 1962 in a different ink, in a hand grown shaky with age. The cumulative count in 1962 was $4,820. You will think that is not a large sum. You are forgetting 2 things. First, $4,820 in 1962 is approximately $51,000 in 2026 purchasing power. Second, the $4,820 in the jar was not the wealth the practice generated. It was the residue. The bulk of every year's count had already been moved out of the jar. into the family business that Yossel and his cousin opened in 1923 on Orchard Street, into the down payment on the Brownsville two-family in 1937, into the tuition for Rivka's grandson at City College in 1955. The jar was the small visible tip. The practice was the large invisible engine. If you want to be on the side of the engine and not on the side of the dispersed suburbs, listen to the next paragraph. Every Friday, before the link in the description closes, you receive the full Rabbi Eliezer file on the Challah Coin Practice, including the 1925 Mizrachi Welfare Council survey scans, the Yankel Hearst Bakery ledger photographs, the relevant pages of Tractate Shabbat 117b, with the Tosafot commentary translated, the 1929 Hearst editorial directives, photographed at the Bancroft Library, and the Rivka Steinberg ledger pages I was permitted to copy. In 1907, J. Pierpont Morgan stood on the floor of his marble library and, by force of personal credit, stopped a bank panic that the United States Treasury could not stop. In 1929, William Randolph Hearst published the editorials that emptied the kitchens of Eldridge Street. In 1933, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation was created to replace the household jar with the federal guarantee. In 1971, the United States Treasury severed the dollar from gold, and every household savings ritual in America became a slow leak into inflation. From Babylon, where the exiles first observed the seventh day in a foreign empire, to Tzfat, where the Kabbalists welcomed Shabbat as a bride, to the Hasidic courts of Galicia, where the Rebbe's wife placed the coins on Friday afternoon with her own hands, to the kitchen of Rivka Steinberg on Eldridge Street in 1908. The Friday ritual was always the same ritual, and the antagonists were always the antagonists who needed our wealth to flow through their institutions rather than rest. For one quiet night a week, between two loaves of bread on a kitchen counter, you have a kitchen, you have a Friday, you have 2 loaves and 2 coins. The practice is not gone. The practice was hidden, now it is in your hands. I am Rabbi Eliezer, these are the files. Next Friday, the file is the Sabbath Lamp Inheritance Code. How Jewish women used the brass Shabbat lamp as a generational asset register that the 1924 Immigration Act tried to erase. The lamp is still on the shelf. The code is still on the lamp. I will read it for you.